upon being chosen, discarded what we were and the names men called us. From this moment on, this man shall be known only as Mahail, one of the chosen.
Chosen?
Essalam seemed to choke on the word.
This child?
She cut off. It was not their place to debate if one was chosen. They could argue among themselves, even plot, if they did so with care. But questioning the Great Lord, that was not allowed. Ever. Essalam said no more. Moradin would not dare call this man chosen if the Great Lord had not decided it. There was no argument to be made. Still, Mogadin shivered. Taim, Mahail, was said to be strong, perhaps as strong as the rest of them. But elevating one from this age with all of their ignorance, it galled her to consider that this Mahail would be regarded as her equal. I see the challenge in your eyes, Moradin said, looking at the three of them, though only one of you was foolish enough to start voicing it. Mahail has earned his reward. Too many of our number threw themselves into contests with Althor when he was presumed to be weak. Mahail instead earned Luz Theron's trust, then took charge of the training of his weapons. He has been raising a new generation of dreadlords to the Shadow's cause. What did the three of you have to show for your work since being released? You will know the fruits I have harvested, Moradin, Demandred said, voice low. You will know them in bushels and droves. Just remember my requirement. I face Althor on the field of battle. His blood is mine, and no one else's. He turned to meet their eyes, each in turn, then finally those of Mahail. There seemed to be a familiarity to them. The two had met before. You will have competition with that one, Demandred, Mogadin thought. He wants Althor nearly as much as you do. Demandred had been changing lately. Once, he wouldn't have cared who killed Luz Theron, so long as the man died. What made Demandred insist on doing the deed himself? Mogadin, Moradin said, Demandred has plans for the war to come. You are to assist him.
Assist him?
She said. Do you forget yourself so quickly, Mogadin? Moradin's voice was silky. You will do as you are told. Demandred wants you watching over one of the armies that now lacks proper monitoring. Speak a single word of complaint, and you will realize that the pain you have known up to now is but a shadow of true agony. Her hand went to the corsuvra at her neck. Looking into his eyes, she felt her authority evaporate. I hate you, she thought. I hate you more for doing this to me in front of the others. The last days are upon us, Moradin said, turning his back on them. In these hours you will earn your final rewards. If you have grudges, put them behind you. If you have plots, bring them to completion. Make your final plays, for this is the end.
Tomonis lay on his back, staring up at a dark sky. The clouds above seemed to be reflecting light from below, the light of a dying city. That was wrong. Light came from above, didn't it? He'd fallen from the horse not long after starting for the city gate. He could remember that, most of the time. Pain made it hard to think. People yelled at one another. I should have taunted Matt more, he thought, a hint of a smile cracking his lips. Stupid time to be thinking of such things. I have to find the dragons. Or did we find them already? I'm telling you, the bloody things don't work like that, Denel's voice. They're not bloody Aes Sedai on wheels. We can't make a wall of fire. We can send these balls of metal hurtling through the Trollocs. They explode, Gaibon's voice. We could use the extras like I say. Tomonis' eyes drifted closed. The balls explode, yes, Denel said. But we have to launch them first. Setting them all in a row and letting the Trollocs run over them won't do much. A hand shook Talmanis' shoulder. Lord Talmanis, Melton said, there is no dishonor in letting it end now. I know the pain is great. May the last embrace of the mother shelter you. A sword being drawn, Talmanis steeled himself. Then he found that he really, really didn't want to die. He forced his eyes open and held up a hand to Melton, who stood over him. Jessamine hovered nearby with arms folded, looking worried. Help me to my feet, Talmanis said. Melton hesitated, then did so. You shouldn't be standing, Jessamine said. Better than being beheaded in honor, Talmanis grumbled, gritting his teeth against the pain. Light, was that his hand? It was so dark. It looked as if it had been charred in a fire. What is going on? We're cornered, my lord, Melton said grimly, eyes solemn. He thought them all as good as dead. Denel and Gaibon are arguing over placement of the dragons for a last stand. Eludra is measuring the charges. Talmanis, finally standing, sagged against Melton. Before him, 2,000 people clustered in the center of a large city square. They huddled like men in the wilderness, seeking one another's warmth on a cold night. Denel and Gaibon had set up the dragons in a half-circle, bowed outward, pointing toward the center of the city, refugees behind. The band was now committed to manning the dragons. 3 pairs of hands were needed to operate each weapon. Almost all of the band had had at least some training. The buildings nearby had caught fire, but the light was doing strange things. Why didn't it reach the streets? Those were all too dark. As if they'd been painted. Like... He blinked, clearing the tears of pain from his eyes, realization dawning. Trollocs filled the streets like ink flowing toward the half-circle of dragons that were pointed at them. Something held the Trollocs back for the moment. They're waiting until they are all together for a rush, Talmanis thought. Calls and snarls came from behind. Talmanis turned, then clutched Melton's arm as the world lurched. He waited for it to steady. The pain was actually dulling, like glowing flames running out of fresh coals. You, in the middle, Raiden's dragon squad. About face, Talmanis screamed. The rest of you, stay in position and fire at the oncoming Trollocs. Move, move, move! The dragoners sprang into motion, Raiden and his men hastily turning their weapons about, wheels creaking. The other dragons began to fire a pattern of shot that sprayed across the entire square. The booms were deafening, causing refugees to scream and cover their ears. It sounded like the end of the world. Hundreds, thousands of Trollocs went down in pools of blood as dragons' eggs exploded in their midst. The square filled with white smoke that poured from the mouths of the dragons. The refugees behind, already terrified by what they had just witnessed, shrieked as Raiden's dragons turned on them, and most of them fell to the ground in fright, clearing a path that exposed the Trolloc-infested city wall. Raiden's line of dragons bowed inward like a cup, the reverse formation of those firing into the Trollocs behind, so that the tubes were pointed at the same section of city wall. Give me one of those bloody punks, Talmanis shouted, holding out a hand. One of the dragoners obeyed, passing him a flaming brand with a glowing red tip. He pushed away from Melton, determined to stand on his own for the moment. Gaibon stepped up. The man's voice sounded soft to Talmanis' strained ears. Those walls have stood for hundreds of years. My poor city. My poor, poor city. It's not your city any longer, Talmanis said, raising his flaming brand high in the air, defiant before a wall thick with Trollocs, a burning city to his back. It's theirs. Talmanis swiped the brand down in the air, leaving a trail of red. His signal ignited a roar of dragon fire that echoed throughout the square. Trollocs, pieces of them at least, blew into the air. The wall under them exploded like a stack of children's blocks kicked at a full run. As Talmanis wavered, his vision blackening, he saw the wall crumble outward around the hole. When he toppled, slipping into unconsciousness, the ground seemed to tremble from the force of his fall. Chapter 1. Eastward the wind blew. The wheel of time turns, and ages come and pass, leaving memories that become legend. Legend fades to myth, and even myth is long forgotten when the age that gave it birth comes again. In one age, called the Third Age by some, an age yet to come, an age long past, a wind rose in the mountains of mist. The wind was not the beginning. There are neither beginnings nor endings to the turning of the wheel of time, but it was a beginning. Eastward the wind blew, descending from lofty mountains and coursing over desolate hills. It passed into the place known as the Westwood, an area that had once flourished with pine and leatherleaf. Here the wind found little more than tangled underbrush, thick save around an occasional towering oak. Those looked stricken by disease, bark peeling free, branches drooping. Elsewhere needles had fallen from pines, draping the ground in a brown blanket. None of the skeletal branches of the Westwood put forth buds. North and eastward the wind blew, across underbrush that crunched and cracked as it shook. It was night, and scrawny foxes picked over the rotting ground, searching in vain for prey or carrion. No spring birds had come to call, and most telling, the howls of wolves had gone silent across the land. The wind blew out of the forest and across Tarrant Ferry. What was left of it? The town had been a fine one, by local standards. Dark buildings, tall above their redstone foundations, a cobbled street built at the mouth of the land known as the Two Rivers. The smoke had long since stopped rising from burned buildings, but there was little left of the town to rebuild. Feral dogs hunted through the rubble for meat. They looked up as the wind passed, their eyes hungry. The wind crossed the river eastward. Here clusters of refugees carrying torches walked the long road from Bearlawn to Whitebridge despite the late hour. They were sorry groups, with heads bowed, shoulders huddled. Some bore the coppery skin of Domani, their worn clothing displaying the hardships of crossing the mountains with little in the way of supplies. Others came from farther off, Taraboners with haunted eyes above dirty veils, farmers and their wives from northern Gildan. All had heard rumors that in Andor there was food. In Andor there was hope. So far, they had yet to find either. Eastward the wind blew, along the river that wove between farms without crops, grasslands without grass, orchards without fruit. Abandoned villages, trees like bones with the flesh picked free. Ravens often clustered in their branches. Starveling rabbits and sometimes larger game picked through the dead grass underneath. Above it all, the omnipresent clouds pressed down upon the land. Sometimes that cloud cover made it impossible to tell if it was day or night. As the wind approached the grand city of Camelin, it turned northward, away from the burning city, orange, red, and violent, spewing black smoke toward the hungry clouds above. War had come to Andor in the still of night. The approaching refugees would soon discover that they'd been marching toward danger. It was not surprising. Danger was in all directions. The only way to avoid walking toward it would be to stand still. As the wind blew northward, it passed people sitting beside roads, alone or in small groups, staring with the eyes of the hopeless. Some lay as they hungered, looking up at those rumbling, boiling clouds. Other people trudged onward, though toward what, they knew not. The last battle to the north, whatever that meant. The last battle was not hope. The last battle was death. But it was a place to be, a place to go. In the evening dimness, the wind reached a large gathering far to the north of Camelin. This wide field broke the forest-patched landscape, but it was overgrown with tents like fungi on a decaying log. Tens of thousands of soldiers waited beside campfires that were quickly denuding the area of timber. The wind blew among them, whipping the smoke from fires into the faces of soldiers. The people here didn't display the same sense of hopelessness as the refugees, but there was a dread to them. They could see the sickened land. They could feel the clouds above. They knew. The world was dying. The soldiers stared at the flames, watching the wood be consumed. Ember by ember, what had once been alive turned to dust. A company of men inspected armor that had begun to rust despite being well oiled. A group of white-robed Aiel collected water, former warriors who refused to take up weapons again, despite their tow having been served. A cluster of frightened servants, sure that tomorrow would bring war between the White Tower and the Dragon Reborn, organized stores inside tents shaken by the wind. Men and women whispered the truth into the night. The end has come. The end has come. All will